I never thought I would end up in court defending myself against a harassment lawsuit filed by the same person who had spent 2 years making my life a living nightmare. But there I was, sitting next to my attorney in a courtroom in Phoenix, Arizona, watching Patricia Evans, president of our Homeowners Association, dab her eyes with a tissue like she was the victim in all of this. My name is Xavier Barnes, and I had moved into the Sunnyside Estates subdivision 3 years ago after landing a job as a software developer at a tech company downtown. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent backyard, and the neighborhood seemed quiet when I toured it. What the realtor conveniently forgot to mention was that Patricia Evans ruled the HOA with an iron fist and took personal offense to anyone who did not bend to her every whim. The problem started small. About 2 months after I moved in, I received my first HOA violation notice. My trash cans were visible from the street on a Thursday afternoon. According to the bylaws, trash cans could only be placed at the curb after 6 in the evening the day before pickup, and they had to be removed within 12 hours of collection. I had put mine out at 4 because I had an early morning meeting and knew I would forget otherwise. The fine was $50. I paid it, annoyed but not thinking much of it. Then came the second notice. My grass was apparently 1 inch too tall. I had measured it myself after getting the notice, and it was well within the acceptable range stated in the HOA guidelines, but Patricia insisted her measurements were correct. Another $50 fine. When I challenged it at the monthly HOA meeting, she gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes and said the board had reviewed her assessment and stood by it. That was when I realized this woman had decided I was her new project. Over the next several months, the violations became absurd. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black, even though it was the exact color specified in the guidelines. My front door wreath during the holidays was too large by 2 inches. I had parked my car in my own driveway at an angle that she deemed unacceptable. Each violation came with a fine, and each time I tried to dispute it, the board backed her up. I later learned that the other 4 board members were terrified of her and just rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. Things escalated when I installed a security camera above my garage. I had done my research and made sure it complied with all HOA rules. It was small, unobtrusive, and pointed only at my own property. Patricia showed up at my door 3 days after installation, her blonde hair styled in that speak to the manager cut that had become a cultural meme, her arms crossed over her chest. "That camera needs to come down," she announced without greeting. "It's within HOA guidelines," I replied, holding up the printed regulations I had highlighted. "It is an eyesore and violates the aesthetic standards of this community." "Show me where in the rules it says that." Her face turned red. "I am the president of this HOA, and I am telling you it needs to come down. You have 48 hours or you will be fined." I did not take it down. The fine came as expected. But that camera ended up being the best investment I ever made because it captured everything that followed. Patricia began driving by my house multiple times a day. At first, I thought it was coincidental, but the camera footage showed her slowing down in front of my property, sometimes stopping completely to take photos with her phone. She came by early in the morning before work, during lunch hours, in the evenings, and even late at night. I counted 17 separate drive-bys in a single week. Then she started walking her small, yappy dog past my house. Patricia lived 6 streets over, and there was a park in the opposite direction, but suddenly, my sidewalk became her preferred route. She would stop in front of my yard, let her dog sniff around, and just stare at my house. When I happened to be outside, she would make comments. Working from home again. Must be nice not having a real job. Your lawn looks patchy. You should really hire a professional service. I hope you are planning to repaint soon. That trim is looking worn. I tried to ignore her, but it was relentless. The HOA violations kept coming too. My house number was not reflective enough. A small crack in my driveway needed immediate repair. The tree in my front yard needed trimming because one branch extended 6 inches past what was allowable. Every single week brought a new notice and a new fine. I started documenting everything. I saved every email, every violation notice, every fine. I kept a log of her drive-bys and her comments. My security camera ran 24/7, and I backed up all the footage to cloud storage. Friends told me I was being paranoid, that I should just move, but I had sunk my savings into this house, and I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president drive me out. The situation reached a breaking point on a Saturday morning in October. I was in my garage working on my car, the door open, music playing softly from my phone. Patricia appeared at the end of my driveway, her dog straining at its leash. "You need to turn that down," she demanded. "There is a noise ordinance." I checked my phone. It is 10 in the morning and this is barely audible from the street. The noise ordinance does not apply until 10 at night. I can hear it, and I find it disturbing. Then do not stand in my driveway. She took a step forward. You have been nothing but a problem since you moved here. I have tried to help you understand how this community works, but you refuse to comply with even the most basic standards. I put down my wrench and stood up. Patricia, you have fined me over $3,000 in the past year for violations that are either made up or so trivial that no reasonable person would care. You drive by my house multiple times every single day. You go out of your way to walk past my property and make nasty comments. I have done everything by the book and you are harassing me. Her eyes went wide and her voice rose to a near shriek. I am harassing you. I am doing my job. You are the one who refuses to follow the rules. You are the one making this neighborhood look bad. Please leave my property. This is a public sidewalk. You are at the end of my driveway, which is not public property. Leave, or I will call the police. She yanked her dog back and stormed off, but not before shouting, "You are going to regret this." I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe she would finally back off. Instead, things got worse. The next week, I received a notice that I was being fined $500 for threatening behavior toward an HOA board member. According to Patricia's complaint, I had become aggressive and used threatening language during our interaction. It was a complete fabrication, but the board approved the fine. I requested a hearing, which was my right under the HOA bylaws. At the hearing, held in the community center, I presented my case. I brought printed logs of all the violations, many of which I demonstrated were baseless. I brought screenshots showing Patricia's drive-bys. I was calm and factual, laying out a clear pattern of harassment. Patricia sat across from me, her face composed, playing the role of concerned community leader. When it was her turn to speak, she painted me as a difficult resident who refused to maintain his property and became hostile when held accountable. The other board members, Mark, Jennifer, Susan, and Tom, barely looked at me. They voted to uphold the fine 4-0 with one abstention from Tom, who at least seemed uncomfortable. After the meeting, Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. He was in his 60s, retired, and clearly exhausted by the whole situation. "Look, Xavier, I believe you," he said quietly. "But Patricia has been president for 8 years, and anyone who goes against her gets targeted next. My wife and I are too old for this stress. I am sorry." I understood, but it did not help my situation. I consulted with a lawyer who told me I could fight this in court, but it would be expensive and HOA cases were tricky. He suggested I try to settle or consider selling my house. I refused to do either. That November, I received another violation notice. This one claimed that I was running a business out of my home, which was prohibited. The evidence: my car was parked in my driveway during work hours, which Patricia claimed indicated I was conducting business activities. The fact that I worked remotely as a software developer, which is not the same as running a business, did not matter to her. The fine was $1,000, the maximum allowed for a single violation. I was furious. I immediately filed a formal complaint against Patricia with the HOA board, detailing her pattern of harassment and requesting her removal as president. I included printed documentation, video timestamps, and a detailed timeline. The board scheduled a meeting to discuss my complaint. I showed up prepared to present everything. Patricia was there too, of course, and she had prepared her own presentation. She claimed that I was a serial rule breaker who was now retaliating against her for doing her job. She presented photos of my property, most of them taken from the street at various times of day, pointing out supposed violations in each one when I tried to show my evidence of her harassment. Jennifer, the vice president, interrupted me. "We have seen enough documentation. This is clearly a case of a resident who does not want to follow the rules and is now trying to blame the HOA president for enforcing them." The board voted to dismiss my complaint and added an additional $500 fine for filing a frivolous grievance. I walked out of that meeting knowing that I had no recourse within the HOA structure. Patricia had complete control, and the board was too weak or too complicit to stop her. December brought a brief respite, mostly because the holidays kept everyone busy. But Patricia still drove by regularly, and I still received violation notices, including one on Christmas Eve for having too many outdoor lights, despite being well under the stated limit. In January, I made a decision. I compiled every piece of evidence I had collected over the past year and a half, organized it meticulously, and sent a formal cease and desist letter to Patricia through my attorney. The letter outlined her pattern of harassment, included selected evidence, and demanded that she stop targeting me or face legal action. She responded by escalating. Within a week of receiving the letter, I received 4 new violation notices in a single day. My house numbers were faded. My driveway had visible tire marks. My mailbox post had a small rust spot. My garage door was not fully closed during the day, which she claimed violated security standards, even though I was home and working in the garage. Then came the incident that led to the lawsuit. On a Friday evening in February, I came home from grocery shopping to find Patricia standing in my front yard, taking photos of my house with her phone. Not from the sidewalk, but actually on my lawn about 10 feet from my front door. "What are you doing?" I demanded, getting out of my car. She did not even look startled. "Documenting violations. Your window screens are damaged. Get off my property right now. I have every right to inspect properties for HOA compliance." "No, you absolutely do not have the right to trespass on my property. Leave now, or I am calling the police." She lowered her phone and looked at me with such contempt. "You are pathetic. You think you can threaten me? I have been running this HOA for 8 years, and I have dealt with problem residents like you before. You will follow the rules or you will be forced out. It is that simple." I pulled out my own phone and started recording. "I am asking you one more time to leave my property." That was when she lost it completely. She started screaming at me, calling me names, telling me I was ruining the neighborhood, that I was a terrible homeowner, that everyone hated me. I just stood there recording while she had her meltdown. Eventually, She seemed to realize what she was doing, stopped abruptly, and walked away without another word. I immediately called the police and filed a trespassing report. The officer who responded was professional and took my statement along with the video I had recorded. He said he would follow up with Patricia. I also sent a copy of the video to my attorney. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. Patricia Evans was suing me for harassment, claiming that I had engaged in a pattern of intimidation, threats, and hostile behavior toward her for over a year. She was seeking $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and requesting a restraining order. I was stunned. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. My attorney, David Chen, was a sharp guy in his 40s who specialized in property disputes. When I showed him the lawsuit, he actually smiled. "This is good for us," he said. "How is being sued for $50,000 good?" "Because she has now made this a legal matter, which means we get to present all your evidence in court. Everything you have been documenting, all the footage, all the violation notices, it all becomes relevant. She has just handed us the opportunity to expose her. So we countersue." "Absolutely. We will file a counterclaim for harassment, emotional distress, and abuse of authority, and we will request attorney fees and compensation for all those bogus fines." Over the next few months, both sides engaged in discovery. Patricia's attorney requested all my communications regarding the HOA, which I happily provided. We requested all of her communications regarding me, along with her records of property inspections and violation notices. We also subpoenaed the HOA's records and requested footage from several neighbors who had security cameras that might have captured Patricia's activities. What we discovered during discovery was even worse than I had realized. Patricia had sent hundreds of emails to other board members about me, many of them containing personal attacks and speculations about my character. She had kept detailed notes about my comings and goings. She had even created a spreadsheet tracking every time she drove by my house and what she observed. Most damning was an email exchange between Patricia and Jennifer, where Patricia explicitly stated that she wanted to make life so difficult for him that he has no choice but to sell. Jennifer had responded with concerns about potential legal liability, but Patricia had dismissed them, saying she knew how to work within the rules. David was ecstatic. "This is textbook harassment." She documented her own malicious intent. We also obtained footage from 2 neighbors. 1. A friendly guy named Carlos who lived across the street had been troubled by Patricia's behavior and was happy to help. His camera had captured multiple instances of Patricia stopping in front of my house, taking photos, and even once stepping onto my lawn to look into my windows. The other neighbor, an older woman named Helen, had footage of Patricia ringing my doorbell repeatedly one evening when I was not home, then peering into my garage windows. As we approached the trial date, Patricia's attorney tried to settle. They offered to drop the lawsuit if I agreed to drop my counterclaim and pay $5,000 to cover her attorney fees. David advised me to reject it, and I did without hesitation. I wanted this on the record. I wanted a judge to see what she had done. The trial took place in late August in the Maricopa County Superior Court. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but it felt imposing nonetheless. Patricia sat with her attorney, a middle-aged man named Richard Downing, who had a reputation for defending difficult clients. She wore a conservative blue suit and kept her expression neutral, the picture of a responsible community leader. Her case went first. Downing presented me as an uncooperative homeowner who had repeatedly violated HOA rules and then became aggressive when held accountable. He characterized Patricia as a dedicated volunteer trying to maintain community standards who had been subjected to my hostility. They called Patricia to the stand. She testified that she had always been professional and fair in her role as HOA president. She claimed that I had threatened her on multiple occasions, that I had followed her around the neighborhood, and that I had made her afraid to do her job. She painted herself as a victim, even tearing up at one point when describing how stressful the situation had become. During cross-examination, David was surgical. He started with simple questions about HOA procedures, getting her to confirm the rules about violations and fines. Then he began walking through specific incidents. Mrs. Evans, you issued a violation notice to Mr. Barnes on March 15th for his grass being too tall, correct? Yes, it exceeded the 3-inch maximum. And did you physically measure the grass? I can tell by looking. I have been doing this for 8 years. But you did not measure it. I did not need to. Mr. Barnes measured it that same day and found it to be 2.5 inches. Do you dispute that measurement? He could have cut it after I issued the notice. The notice was delivered at 8 in the morning, and he measured it at 8:30. Are you suggesting he cut his entire lawn in 30 minutes before going to work? She hesitated. I do not know what he did. David pulled up photos on the screen, images from my phone with timestamps. This is Mr. Barnes's lawn on March 15th at 8:35 in the morning. Does this look like freshly cut grass to you? I issued the violation based on what I observed, or based on a desire to fine him regardless of whether a violation actually existed. Objection, Downing said. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, but the point was made. David continued, walking through violation after violation, demonstrating the pattern. He showed emails where Patricia had discussed wanting to force me out. He showed the spreadsheet tracking my activities. He played the video I had recorded of her screaming at me in my front yard. Mrs. Evans, in this video, are you standing on Mr. Barnes's property? I was conducting an inspection. Without his permission. I do not need permission to inspect properties for violations. Actually, you do. The HOA bylaws clearly state that inspections must be conducted from public areas unless the homeowner grants access. Did Mr. Barnes grant you access to his yard? No, but I could see the violation from there. Could you see it from the sidewalk? Possibly. Then why were you on his property? She did not have a good answer. David then began presenting footage from my security camera and the neighbors' cameras. The judge watched in silence as clip after clip showed Patricia driving by my house, stopping to take photos, walking past slowly while staring, and on several occasions stepping onto my property. Mrs. Evans, I have compiled the footage from Mr. Barnes's security camera. Over the course of 18 months, you drove past his house approximately 470 times. For reference, his house is not on a main road, and you live 6 streets away in the opposite direction from any shopping or services. Can you explain why you needed to drive past his house an average of almost once per day? I drive through the neighborhood regularly to check on properties. All properties, or just Mr. Barnes's? All properties. Then you would have similar numbers of drive-bys for other houses on his street, she stammered. I do not keep track. But you did keep track of Mr. Barnes's activities, as evidenced by your spreadsheet. In fact, you noted in that spreadsheet what time you observed him leaving for work, returning home when he had visitors, and what he was wearing on numerous occasions. That is not HOA enforcement, Mrs. Evans. That is stalking. Objection. Downing was on his feet. Counsel is testifying. I will rephrase, David said calmly. Mrs. Evans, Why did you feel it necessary to track Mr. Barnes's personal activities that had nothing to do with HOA violations? I was documenting a pattern of behavior. What pattern? Being home during work hours, having friends visit, working in his garage. None of those things violate any HOA rule, do they? He was running a business from his home. His employer confirmed that he is a salaried remote employee, not a business owner. You received that confirmation in writing, yet you still fined him $1,000. Why? She did not answer, her composure finally cracking. David let the silence stretch, then nodded to the judge. No further questions. When it was time for our case, David systematically built the narrative of harassment. He called me to the stand first, and I walked through the entire timeline, staying calm and factual. I explained how the violations had started small and escalated, how I had tried to resolve things through proper channels, and how Patricia's behavior had affected my life. Mr. Barnes, can you describe the impact this situation has had on you? I have constant anxiety, I said. Every time I pull into my driveway, I wonder what new violation notice will be waiting for me. I cannot enjoy my own home because I am always worried about whether my trash cans are positioned exactly right or whether a leaf blew onto my driveway. I have spent thousands of dollars on fines that I should not have had to pay. I have had to take time off work to attend HOA meetings and deal with this situation. And I have felt completely powerless because the system that was supposed to be fair was being used as a weapon against me. David then called Carlos, my neighbor, who testified about Patricia's unusual behavior. I have lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and I have never seen her pay this much attention to any other property. It was weird, honestly. My wife and I talked about it because it just seemed obsessive. Helen, the other neighbor, testified about the evening she saw Patricia repeatedly ringing my doorbell and looking in my windows. I almost called the police myself because it looked like someone was casing the house. When I realized it was Mrs. Evans, I was shocked. That is not normal behavior for anyone, let alone the HOA president. David also called Tom, the board member who had expressed sympathy for my situation. Tom was clearly nervous about testifying, but he told the truth. The board has not been functioning properly. Mrs. Evans makes all the decisions, and the rest of us just vote yes because it is easier than fighting with her. I knew what she was doing to Mr. Barnes was wrong, but I did not have the courage to stop it. I am sorry for that. The most powerful evidence, though, was the video compilation David had prepared. He played nearly 40 minutes of footage showing Patricia's activities around my property over the 18-month period. It was edited chronologically and showed the escalation clearly. The judge watched intently, occasionally making notes. The final piece was the email where Patricia had stated her intention to force me out. David displayed it on the screen and read the key sentence aloud. Make life so difficult for him that he has no choice but to sell. That is not enforcement of rules, Your Honor. That is targeted harassment with the explicit goal of depriving my client of his property rights. Closing arguments were straightforward. Downing tried to salvage Patricia's case by arguing that she had been doing her job, and that I was oversensitive and combative. David countered that no amount of appeals to authority could justify the documented pattern of obsessive, targeted harassment. The judge took a week to issue his ruling. When David called to tell me the verdict, I was at work and stepped into a conference room for privacy. We won, he said simply. On everything. The judge had ruled in my favor on all counts. He found that Patricia had engaged in a pattern of harassment that went far beyond her duties as HOA president. He dismissed her lawsuit against me entirely and awarded me damages on my counterclaim. The financial award was $37,000, which included compensation for the improper fines, emotional distress, and attorney fees. But the most satisfying part was the judge's written opinion, which David sent me later that day. The judge had written a scathing assessment of Patricia's conduct, stating that she had abused her position of authority within the HOA to conduct a personal vendetta against the defendant, systematically violating his rights as a homeowner and attempting to deprive him of the peaceful enjoyment of his property. The judge also ordered that all violation notices and fines issued to me by Patricia be voided and that I be reimbursed for everything I had paid. He prohibited Patricia from issuing any further violations to me without approval from the full HOA board. Most significantly, he recommended that the HOA bylaws be amended to include stronger checks on presidential authority, and that the board consider Patricia's fitness to continue serving. The fallout was immediate. The story made it into the local news, with a reporter doing a segment about HOA abuse of power. Several other residents from Sunnyside Estates came forward with their own stories of Patricia's behavior, though none had documented things as thoroughly as I had. A petition began circulating to remove Patricia as president and recall the entire board. The HOA held an emergency meeting 3 weeks after the verdict. Over 100 residents showed up, filling the community center beyond capacity. The anger in that room was palpable. Person after person stood up to share their experiences with Patricia's tyranny, stories of petty fines, arbitrary enforcement, and intimidation. Patricia attended, sitting in the front row, her expression stony. When it came time for the vote, the result was overwhelming. She was removed as president by a margin of 87-3. Jennifer, Susan, and Mark also resigned rather than face a recall vote. Tom stayed on to help transition to a new board. The new board, elected a month later, was a complete change in culture. They immediately implemented reforms, including limits on presidential authority, a transparent appeals process for violations, and term limits for board members. They also voted to reimburse several other residents who had been improperly fined over the years. As for Patricia, she initially tried to stay in the neighborhood, but the judgment against her was substantial and she had to pay it. Between that and the legal fees for her own attorney, she was in financial trouble. Her husband, who I had barely ever seen, apparently decided he had had enough. According to neighborhood gossip, he filed for divorce 4 months after the trial. Patricia put her house on the market in December and moved away without telling anyone where she was going. The house sold quickly because it was one of the nicest properties in the subdivision, ironically kept in perfect condition because she was so obsessed with appearances. I stayed in my house, and life finally returned to normal. I have not received a single violation notice since Patricia left. The new HOA board is reasonable and actually works to support residents rather than antagonize them. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee to help ensure that standards are enforced fairly and sensibly. My security camera is still running, though now it just captures the occasional delivery person or neighborhood cat. I kept all the footage from the Patricia era backed up in multiple locations, just in case, but I do not think I will ever need it again. The whole experience taught me several things. First, documentation is everything. If I had not installed that camera and kept meticulous records, I would have had no defense against Patricia's accusations. Second, abuse of power thrives when good people stay silent. Tom and the other board members knew what Patricia was doing was wrong, but their fear of becoming her next target allowed her to continue. Third, Institutions like HOAs need strong checks and balances, or they become tools for petty tyrants. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that you have to stand up for yourself even when the system seems rigged against you. It would have been easier to pay the fines, keep my head down, and maybe eventually move away. But I refused to be driven out of my own home by someone who had decided to abuse the small amount of power she had been given. The financial compensation from the judgment helped, certainly. I used part of it to make some actual improvements to my house, including new landscaping and a fresh coat of paint, not because the HOA demanded it, but because I wanted to. I also donated some money to a legal aid fund that helps homeowners fight unfair HOA actions, hoping to make it easier for the next person who finds themselves in a similar situation. Life in Sunnyside Estates is peaceful now. I have gotten to know my neighbors better, and there is a genuine sense of community that was missing before. People are not afraid to use their yards or make minor improvements without fear of arbitrary fines. The neighborhood actually looks better because people take pride in their homes rather than viewing them as sources of stress. I occasionally think about Patricia and wonder if she learned anything from the experience. Part of me doubts it. People who are that consumed by the need to control others rarely engage in self-reflection. But I hope that wherever she ended up, she is not in a position to make other people's lives miserable. As for me, I am content. My house is exactly what I wanted it to be when I first bought it. A comfortable place to live without drama or harassment. I have a good job, good neighbors, and the satisfaction of knowing that I stood up to a bully and won. On quiet evenings, I sometimes sit on my front porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. My mailbox is whatever shade of black it happens to be. My trash cans come out when it is convenient for me, within the reasonable rules, of course. My grass is cut regularly but not obsessively, and nobody is lurking around documenting my every move. That is not too much to ask. That is just the basic right to enjoy your own property in peace, which is what homeownership is supposed to be about. The HOA system, when it works correctly, is meant to maintain property values and create a pleasant living environment. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a mechanism for petty authoritarianism. The reforms implemented by the new board have made Sunnyside Estates a model for other communities dealing with similar issues. Representatives from several other HOAs in the Phoenix area reached out to learn about our new bylaws and governance structure. It turns out that abusive HOA leadership is a widespread problem, but few people fight back because the process is intimidating and expensive. My case became something of a blueprint. David, my attorney, started getting calls from other homeowners facing similar situations. He even gave a presentation at a local property law seminar about the importance of documentation in HOA disputes. I attended and was asked to speak about my experience from the homeowner's perspective. Standing in front of a room full of attorneys and homeowners, I shared my story and emphasized the key factors that made my case successful: comprehensive documentation, persistence through a biased internal process, and the willingness to take legal action when necessary. I also stressed the importance of community support, noting that my neighbors' willingness to testify and provide footage had been crucial. After the presentation, several people approached me with their own horror stories. One couple had been fighting their HOA for 3 years over a dispute about their fence color. Another man had been fined repeatedly for parking his work truck in his driveway, even though the HOA rules did not explicitly prohibit it. A woman told me about an HOA president who had tried to ban all holiday decorations because he found them tacky. Each story reinforced what I had learned. HOAs attract a certain type of person who craves the authority and uses it to impose their personal preferences on everyone else. Without proper oversight and accountability, these small-scale dictators can make life unbearable for their neighbors. The legal victory also had personal benefits beyond the financial. The stress that had been weighing on me for 2 years lifted almost immediately. I slept better. I stopped dreading coming home. Simple activities like mowing the lawn or checking my mail were no longer tinged with anxiety about what violation Patricia might manufacture. My work performance improved too. I had not realized how much mental energy the HOA situation had been consuming until it was over. My productivity increased, and I even got a promotion 6 months after the trial ended. My boss mentioned that I seemed more focused and engaged, which was definitely true. Relationships also improved. I had been so consumed by the conflict with Patricia that I had somewhat isolated myself from friends and family, not wanting to burden them with my problems or turn every conversation into a rant about HOA abuse. Once it was over, I reconnected with people and found that I could actually enjoy social interactions again without the cloud of stress hanging over me. I even started dating someone I met through mutual friends. Her name was Rachel, and she worked as a nurse at a hospital in Scottsdale. When I told her about the HOA situation, she listened with interest but without judgment. She had heard stories about crazy HOAs but had never experienced one herself since she rented an apartment. "I cannot imagine dealing with that," she said over dinner one night. Having someone obsessed with policing your every move sounds like a nightmare. It was, I admitted, but it made me realize how important it is to stand up for yourself. I could have given up and moved, but then she would have won, and some other poor person would have moved into my house and become her next target. "You did the right thing," Rachel said. "Not everyone would have had the patience to document everything and fight back properly." We have been together for over a year now, and she has joked about being nervous to ever live in an HOA community. I assured her that not all HOAs are bad, but I also admitted that I would be very careful about researching the governance structure before ever buying in one again. The experience also changed my perspective on community involvement. Before Patricia, I had been content to stay out of neighborhood affairs and just live my life. Now, I understand the importance of participating in governance structures, even boring ones like HOA boards. If more reasonable people get involved, there is less room for tyrants to take control. I have been serving on the Architectural Review Committee for over a year now, and it has been surprisingly rewarding. We review requests for modifications and additions, ensuring they comply with the community standards while being flexible and reasonable. The difference between our approach and Patricia's is night and day. We work with homeowners, not against them. Just last month, a resident wanted to install solar panels on his roof. Under Patricia, that request would have been denied immediately because she considered solar panels ugly. Our committee approved it after verifying that the panels met the technical requirements and would not create drainage issues or other problems for neighboring properties. The homeowner was thrilled, and it set a precedent for other residents to make environmentally friendly improvements. The new board also organized actual community events, something Patricia had never bothered with. We have had several neighborhood barbecues, a holiday light contest that was fun rather than stressful, and even a community garage sale. These events helped build relationships between neighbors and created a genuine sense of community, rather than the atmosphere of fear and suspicion that had existed before. I have also maintained a relationship with Carlos and Helen. the neighbors who testified on my behalf. We get together occasionally for dinner or to watch sports. Carlos told me that testifying was one of the hardest things he had done because he worried about retaliation, but he felt it was necessary. Helen said she was just glad to see justice done, and that the neighborhood was finally pleasant again. Tom, the former board member, also became a friend. He struggled with guilt over not standing up to Patricia sooner, and I told him I understood. Confronting someone like that is difficult, especially when you feel isolated. But he stayed on the board during the transition period and helped implement the reforms, which took real courage. The financial aspect of the judgment worked out well. Patricia initially tried to delay payment, but David filed the appropriate motions, and the court enforced the judgment. I received the full amount, including attorney fees, within 4 months of the verdict. After paying David his contingency fee from the award, I still netted over $25,000. I used some of that money to take a real vacation for the first time in years, a trip to Colorado for hiking and relaxation. Being in the mountains, away from everything, gave me perspective on how much of my life had been consumed by the conflict. It felt good to realize that it was truly over and that I could move forward. The rest of the money went into savings and home improvements. I replaced my aging air conditioning system, which was a practical investment in Phoenix's brutal summers. I also redid my backyard landscaping with desert-appropriate plants that looked good while conserving water. The Architectural Review Committee approved everything quickly and without hassle, which was a refreshing change. Looking back now, almost 2 years after the trial, I can see how the experience shaped me. I am more aware of my rights and more willing to defend them. I am more engaged in my community and more conscious of how governance structures can be used or abused. And I am more appreciative of the simple pleasure of living in my own home without someone breathing down my neck about trivial nonsense. The house itself has become everything I hoped it would be. I have made it truly mine, with modifications and improvements that reflect my tastes and needs rather than someone else's arbitrary standards. The backyard is set up for entertaining, with a small patio area where friends gather for evening conversations. The garage is organized as a functional workspace. The interior has been updated with new paint and furnishings that make it comfortable and welcoming. Patricia's house, now occupied by a young family with 2 kids, has integrated seamlessly into the neighborhood. The new owners are friendly and involved in community activities. Their kids play in the street with other neighborhood children, something that would have resulted in violation notices under Patricia's regime. The transformation of Sunnyside Estates from a place of stress and conflict to an actual community has been remarkable to witness. Property values have even increased slightly, which puts to rest the argument that strict enforcement is necessary to maintain home values. It turns out that people are willing to pay more to live in a neighborhood where they will not be harassed. I have thought about writing a more detailed account of the experience, perhaps as a guide for other homeowners facing similar situations. David encouraged me to do so, saying that practical information about how to fight back against HOA abuse is hard to find. Maybe someday I will, but for now, I am content to share my story when asked and to serve as an example that you do not have to accept being bullied, even by someone with institutional authority. The legal system, for all its flaws, worked in this case. It took time and money and stress, but ultimately, justice was served. The judge saw through Patricia's facade and recognized the documented pattern of harassment. The court protected my property rights and held an abuser accountable. That is what the system is supposed to do, and it is gratifying when it actually works that way. If I could give advice to anyone facing a similar situation, it would be this: document everything from the very beginning. Install cameras if you legally can. Save every email, every letter, every notice. Keep detailed logs of interactions and incidents. Build your case methodically because you will need overwhelming evidence to overcome the presumption that the HOA is acting properly. Second, try to resolve things through proper channels first, even if you know it will not work. Exhaust the internal appeals process. Attend meetings and state your case clearly. This creates a record showing that you tried to be reasonable and work within the system. It also demonstrates the HOA's bias or intransigence, which becomes relevant in court. Third, consult with an attorney who specializes in property disputes and HOA issues. Not all lawyers understand the specific dynamics and legal frameworks involved. You need someone who has experience in this area and can advise you on the strength of your case and the best strategy. Fourth, be prepared for it to be expensive and time-consuming. Legal action should be a last resort, but sometimes it is necessary. Make sure you have the financial resources and emotional stamina to see it through. In my case, David worked on a contingency basis for the counterclaim, but I still had expenses, and the whole process took months. Finally, do not let anyone convince you that standing up for yourself makes you the problem. People like Patricia thrive on intimidating their targets into silence. They count on you feeling isolated and powerless, but you have rights, and those rights matter. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, and no HOA president has the authority to turn it into a source of constant stress. The story of my battle with Patricia has become somewhat legendary in local HOA reform circles. I have been interviewed by homeowner advocacy groups and even quoted in an article about HOA abuse in a Phoenix magazine. While I never sought attention for this situation, I am glad that sharing the story might help others in similar circumstances. Recently, I received an email from a homeowner in Temp who had read about my case and was facing harassment from his own HOA board. He asked if I would be willing to talk with him about his situation and share advice. I spent an hour on the phone with him, walking through the steps I had taken and emphasizing the importance of documentation. He thanked me profusely and said knowing that someone else had successfully fought back gave him hope. That conversation reminded me why going through the legal battle was worth it. Yes, I got justice for myself, but the case also created a precedent and a roadmap for others. It demonstrated that HOA board members are not untouchable, and that homeowners have legal recourse when their rights are violated. The reforms in Sunnyside estates have also had a ripple effect. Other HOAs in the area have looked at our new bylaws and adopted similar provisions. The local Homeowners Association coalition invited our board president to speak about best practices in governance. Slowly, the culture is changing from one where HOA boards wield unchecked power to one where accountability and transparency are expected. As I sit on my porch this evening, watching kids ride bikes down the street and neighbors chatting on their lawns, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This is what a neighborhood should be: people living their lives, taking care of their properties because they want to, not because they are afraid of some petty tyrant with a citation book. Patricia is gone. Her reign of terror ended. The community has healed and moved forward. And I am still here, in the home I refuse to be driven from, finally able to enjoy it in peace. The 2 years of harassment were terrible, but standing up to it and winning was worth every moment of stress and every dollar spent on legal fees. Justice was served, not just for me, but for every homeowner who has ever been bullied by an HOA board member drunk on the tiny bit of power they were given. The court footage did indeed show who the real harasser was, and in the end, the truth prevailed. That is all anyone can ask for, and it is a reminder that even when systems seem rigged and fighting back seems futile, persistence and documentation can lead to justice. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way, and I hope anyone else tempted to abuse HOA authority thinks twice before following her path. My life has returned to normal, better than normal really, because I no longer take for granted the simple freedom to live in my own home without harassment. Every day without a violation notice is a good day. Every interaction with the current HOA board that is professional and reasonable is a reminder of how much things have improved. The story that started with a $50 fine for trash cans being out 2 hours early ended with a complete vindication and a reformed community. It was a long, difficult journey, but I would do it all again because some things are worth fighting for, and the right to peacefully enjoy your own property is definitely one of them.